Okay, so at this point, again, you should have now in the lesson, you should have watched a short video on YouTube about the Articles of Confederation, and you should have looked through the handout, kind of explaining the articles, their problems, how we attempted to form a new government, and some of the problems and compromises that we had to go through to do that. And then, of course, answered hopefully some questions about it from the handout in the video. So, all right, I just want to touch on a few things because this is a really kind of complicated set of topics. So I'll try to make this as short as possible, but I want to make sure that a few things are very clear. So first, I think there's really two main issues that the Articles of Confederation had. First, it gives only one vote to each state. And that just is inherently quite clunky and unfair when you had some states like Georgia with very, very few people that live there. And then you had states like Virginia and New York that had upwards of half the population of the United States at this point. So it left the big states feeling like they didn't have hardly any power in government, and they didn't like that. Second major problem is the Articles of Confederation required 9 out of 13 states to approve any new law. That's never going to happen, guys. I mean, come on. You can't get 9 out of 13 people to agree that, say, Chick-fil-A is better than Popeyes, right? Or that McDonald's is better than Wendy's, or whatever, right? I mean, that is an insane number of votes that you need to get in order to pass a law. And that led to deadlock, gridlock, and nothing could get done, nothing could get solved. And so this is why then, a few years after we won the revolution, everyone said, oh my gosh, we have to have a different government. And so we chose guys to come together and work on and create a new government and a new document, the Constitution, that would run that government. Okay, so what were the three problems then that the guys that got together to write this new government and this new Constitution, what three problems did they run into? Well, these are fairly simple problems. First, what's the government going to look like? Right? So in other words, are we going to give lots of power to the big states or to the small states? That's problem number one. Problem number two, are we going to allow slavery in the United States or not? And problem number three, how are we going to fund the government? How are we going to raise tax revenue? Okay, so again, the three problems, are big or small states going to dominate? How are we going to do that? Second, how are we going to deal with the slavery issue? And third, where are we going to get tax revenue from? Okay, so of course they had to then compromise because, to be frank, there was not 9 out of 13 states that could agree on any of the solutions to those problems. So they compromised. So on the handout, you saw the three famous compromises. And let me just walk you through a couple sticking points in each of them that sometimes are a little tougher to understand. The first compromise was called the Connecticut Compromise. So it combined the two ideas. It said, all right, let's have two groups that have to pass a law. And so one group will be based on population, right? We'll give you more representatives and more votes if you have a bigger population. And that kept the big states happy. And the other group that had to pass laws then was only equal for every state. Every state got 2 votes in this group. And so today we call this the House of Representatives, okay, the group that's based on population, and we call it the Senate, where every state gets 2 representatives or 2 votes. And this would allow the big and the small states to kind of like check on each other and make sure that neither type was dominating the new government. All right, so that's the first compromise, right? House of Representatives and the Senate both have to pass laws. Okay? Second issue and second compromise was slavery. Okay, well, we passed then what's called the Slave Trade Compromise to deal with the slavery issue. And the North, erroneously and naively, thought that this would get rid of slavery. So in this compromise, the North said, all right, South, you can keep your slaves, and we'll give you 20 more years to bring in as many new slaves as you want. But at 20 years, in 1808, no more slaves can be brought into the United States. And the North thought that slavery then would just die out naturally. And that's very naive. Most Northerners had never seen a Southern slave plantation, and they didn't realize that Southern slave owners would simply encourage families, therefore kids, therefore new slaves. And so slavery continued and continued, even though the slave trade ended in 1808. Now, in that compromise, the South also agreed to make sure there weren't export taxes. All right, so it's kind of the slave trade compromise really deals with two issues: slavery and how are we going to fund our government. Okay, well, third issue: if we can't have export taxes, then how are we going to fund the government? And this is the third compromise. Then it was called the 3/5 compromise. So the idea here is, okay, let's tax every state by their population. That makes sense, right? The more people in a state, the more taxes they should pay. But the question became, should slaves count towards your population? The South, of course, said, well, no, we don't want to pay more taxes because of our slaves. And the North said, hey, come on, they're people. They should count towards your population. And so there had to be a compromise here. So I don't know why, but the two sides agreed to count a slave as 3/5 of a person. Now, this doesn't give slaves any rights, but it simply helps to calculate your population of your state. And so if you have a higher population, because you count each slave as 3/5 of a person, you have to pay more taxes. Now, the South thought, okay, that's fine, but if we're going to pay more taxes, then those slaves and our population should also then raise the number of representatives that we get in the House of Representatives in our new government. And so again, it's a compromise. The South agrees to pay more taxes because of their slaves, but they also demand more representatives from that higher population. Okay, so lots of details there, right? I would refer you to the handout if you really have lots of questions. But the point is, this was a big deal, right? These were big problems that required really quite creative compromises in order to get our new government and our Constitution written and enacted. So tomorrow, in the next lesson, we'll deal with, okay, what's a couple issues that happen then once this Constitution is written? It might sound like it solves all the problems, but there's still one major concern that's left. Again, this is lots of information. If you've got questions or you're not sure on anything, please feel free. Contact me via email or text, right? Or if you can stand it, watch the video again. All right, see ya.